Hello and welcome everyone. In this video I'll show how to make oil washes for your miniatures. An oil wash is a controlled wash which can be used to bring out detail and also outline the miniature. I will show you all the steps needed to make them and then apply them to a few miniatures. As the first example, I'm going to apply an oil wash to these wolves I have here. I already gave them a base coat using acrylic paints. In order to give the models a protective coat, I will give the models a coat of gloss varnish. This also gives the models a smooth surface, so the wash will flow over it easily. The best way to apply varnish is to use an airbrush, as this gives you a lot of control. But you could also use a spray can to do this step. Next, I'm going to attach the models to some plastic containers, so I can spray them easy without having to touch them. To do this, I used some pieces of this poster tag I have here. You can find these at most hobby stores. When the models are steady, I will use my airbrush and add the varnish to it. I personally like to dilute my varnishes 2-part varnish to 1-part water. Should you want to use a spray can, I've listed a few recommendable brands. When working with varnishes, you want to make sure you have good ventilation and also wear a dust cap as the bare minimum. I gave the models a light and even coat of this gloss varnish. At the same time, I will prepare these fantasy orc models I've painted up recently. And I would like to give my thanks to the nice people from Spellcrow Miniatures for sending me these miniatures. This model came with a shield, but I gave him a small copper chain instead. I will use these models on a diorama terrain piece I'm building at the moment. I also gave these guys a coat of gloss varnish in the same way I did the wolves. Next, I will prepare the oil washes, and here are the basic materials you will need. First off, you will need some artist oil paints, which you can find at most art or hobby stores. Next, some odorless white spirit. I think it's called mineral spirits in the US. Any paint palette and some cheap brushes, which you want to dedicate for using your oil washes only. And finally, a plastic pipette. As the name suggests, oil paints work on oils and natural pigments. When opening your paint tube, there will usually be a little layer of linseed oil lying on the paint. I use a brush and mix this in with the oil paint. I then take a tiny drop of the paint and add it to the palette. Because oil paints are very thick and concentrated, you will need very little of this. Next, I will add a few drops of odorless white spirit to the paint and mix them up. Depending on how strong you want the wash to be, you can add more or less drops to the mix, but a good ratio will be around 10 to 12 drops with this amount of paint. If you want to check the flow of the wash, you can do this on some textured kitchen towel. I gave the first brown wolf an overall wash using burnt umber. Because of the gloss varnish, the wash flows over the model very easy and I only have to tap the brush on it. Oil washes are very well suited for washing fur, hair and other detailed textures. Keep in mind that white spirit and oil paint do not mix all that well, so you have to keep stirring your wash often. For some variation, I gave the lower parts of the second wolf a wash made with raw sienna. They will basically blend by themselves when they touch while still wet. In order to outline some of the detail, as the eye sockets, teeth and nails, I will add a darker wash made using Van Dyke Brown. The grey wolf was then given a wash of lamp black for the upper parts. The lighter part of the fur was then given a wash made with raw sienna. With these orcs, my aim is to outline the detail to make it stand out a bit more. So I carefully apply a few dark colors on areas which I think can use some more shadow. Here I used several green and brown washes for some variation, but you could also wash the entire miniature with a dark brown color, just like I did on the wolves, to get a nice result. I gave the tunics a wash made of raw umber. It's very important you give this wash enough drying time, and I will recommend 1 to 1.5 hours at least for the best results. Once dry, you can apply a second layer of wash should you wish some more shadow, but I wouldn't go further than 2 layers with this. The gloss varnish layer protects the paint layers underneath it, but the white spirit will slowly dissolve it after a few hours. For the deepest shadows, I used a wash made of Van Dyke Brown. To add some more color, I applied a tiny bit of alizarin crimson to the fire. You can also use oil washes on terrain or bases. Only thing to keep in mind is that you apply it as the very last step and don't paint over it with acrylics. When the wash had dried for 1.5 hours, I can now start with the cleanup of the models. Some people like to use Q-tips for this, but I personally find these to be really annoying as they leave a lot of small hairs on your models. Another option is to clip off a piece of dense sponge, which also works. The best option for this step is to use a makeup sponge. However, in order to get these, you'll have to cross a certain boundary and visit a place unholy to men, which is the makeup section. I will then wet the makeup sponges in some of the white spirit. Make sure you take most of it off on a paper towel. You want them to be damp, not wet. Next, I will carefully wipe across the miniatures with very little pressure. This will reveal your previous paint layers again and leave the wash in the recesses. If I did use too much white spirit, you risk taking the wash from the recesses. This also happens if you didn't give the wash enough time to dry. Here you can see the before and after effect. Know that apart from varnishes, you can't paint over oils with acrylics, so save an oil wash as one of the last steps of your work. The big advantage over an acrylic wash is that an oil wash can be reactivated and removed where you don't want it. Whereas an acrylic wash basically stains the whole surface and acts more like a filter. After letting the white spirit dry for half an hour, I will now apply a coat of satin varnish to the models. You could also use matte varnish, but I personally like the satin effect a bit more on fantasy miniatures. When doing this with a spray can, you want to make sure you apply a thin, even layer from a good distance, not touch the models when drying, and make sure your environment is not too cold. After the varnish had dried, the models looked like this. When starting with oil washes, you'll find there are a lot of colors to choose from. A lot of stores will have some free samples of oil paint if you ask them, so you can practice a little and try it out. These particular colors aren't exactly what you'll be needing on miniatures, although I did have this one. I used a wash made of phthalo turquoise or turquoise, not sure how to pronounce it in English. You obviously will not be needing as many colors as I have here, and 1 or 2 dark colors will get you a good start. I've made a little comparison with some acrylic washes to give you an idea on certain colors. I have used the acrylic washes undiluted on some paper on the right, and will then give an oil wash alternative to it on the left. One thing you'll notice is the oil washes are much richer in pigment than the acrylic ones. When buying oil paints, I recommend you buy the smallest tube you can find, as you can make a lot of wash with just a tiny drop of paint, as I've shown earlier. You'll find that some oil paints are more expensive than others. This is because they work on natural pigments, and some are more rare and expensive than others. Notice how little pigment, in particular these black and bluish washes, have in comparison to oils. With this, we've covered all steps necessary to do oil washes, and I will wrap up this video. I really hope you've enjoyed watching it and that it was of any use to you. I hope to see you in the next video. As always, thank you for watching, stay tuned for more, and take care.
Work complete.